Good morning. So I believe leadership is also about teamwork. Raise your hand if you agree. So I'm going to introduce to you the best team in the world. Can you guys join me on stage, please? You all have our bios, and just keep in mind, disinformation is in mine too. But I'm not going to want to get us going this morning, so I'm not going to give lengthy bios. I'm just going to introduce by title my very, very esteemed team. And we're going to do something this morning very different. Can we turn the slide? So I'd like you all, we'll keep going here, to just kind of take this in as I introduce our panel, who's really going to direct our discussion today. And what we're going to do is engage you in a scenario. So get ready, hold tight, and to help us through what is going to be a crisis, Todd McCracken, who is the President and CEO of the National Association of Small Businesses. It's the largest and oldest small business association, and I have to tell you, I personally can say that Todd's leadership has made a difference in business in the United States. Personally, his engagement, his huge respect on the Hill, and his leadership, especially in this area, has been significant, early, and impressive. So welcome, Todd. Tiffany Lopez Winters came out of the Air Force intelligence realm, has worked in top-tier private sector areas, and is one of our nation's top cyber and counterintelligence experts. Tiffany was one of the first women, I might also add, to do the deep dive in cyber, and that was a pretty lonely space in early days. She has had the privilege and been very successful in advising literally our top nation's leaders. She is the co-founder of DC4 Global, and I'm going to let her interchange some of her other roles and with her discretion as we get started. Welcome, Tiffany, here today. And it's also my pleasure to round out our team with Lieutenant General Ken Tovo. I've had the distinct honor to be able to support many of General Tovo's operations and team really across the globe. He was the commander of the United States Army Special Operations Command. It is the largest and most extensive part of the Special Operations community. He is just recently retired, and we will call him Ken, but I still lapse here and there. But ladies and gentlemen, this man has saved our lives, and so we owe him a great debt of honor, and actually I can probably say that about all three here. But please welcome Ken Tovo. And so we begin. It is a damp and cold day with a hint of snow in the air as the global business leaders gather in Williamsburg, Virginia for the first International Small Business Global Symposium, sponsored by the World Economic Forum and hosted by Vice President Mike Pence and Todd. Business leaders, heads of state, economists, titans of technologies, their staff, security, and press corps are flying in by private jet, shuttling down from Washington, D.C., or driving in from all points. The Tidewater of Virginia is rich in history, home of the U.S. Naval Base Norfolk, Yorktown, and Virginia Beach. It is a mix of business, industry, tourism, and military presence, centered on the plentiful resources of the beautiful area and business and industry. The morning commuter traffic has subsided, but the roads are still abuzz, with traffic slowed by the extra security measures and the inbound dignitaries. In the nearby Dominion Surrey Power Station, a nuclear power plant generation facility, a young engineer sips his second Monster energy drink. He glances around at his oblivious colleagues as he hits the final stroke on his keyboard. The young techie unleashes a sequence of code that proliferates across the nuclear power plant's network. He nervously taps his foot, energized by the caffeine surging through his veins and the jihad he has initiated. Satisfied, he pushes back his chair, makes for the door just as the first alarm blares. He laughs to himself as he recalls he was the first to complete his insider threat training module. As he makes his way to the parking lot, he glances at his watch and he smiles. Right on time. It's 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. At the Surrey Nuclear Power Plant, Code Red Team is working furiously in the control center. Up on one of the big screens in the far right corner, a digital clock marks 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it remains in a fixed position, holding mark on when the network sensors detected abnormalities. A second screen counts minutes, seconds, since the insidious virus inside the millions of dollars worth of equipment eats through all defenses and begins triggering a cascade of events, shutting down systems, taking out critical processes, and propagating multiple consequences. Alarms, alerts, lights, buzzers, and the click of keyboards echoed through the control center as the expert furiously tried to mitigate the unknown. Then, pitch dark, black. Light flickers, sputters, back as the emergency backup power takes over. Shut down whatever you can, it's heard. But that's before the command can even be finished. Darkness. All screens are black. For miles and miles, the region goes dark. The power grid is down, communication fractured, and other critical infrastructures across the region are immediately impacted. Meanwhile, far, far, far away, a very expert cyber team initiates and then takes over systems in the Ivy Lake Dam, the Bath County Dam, and numerous other smaller dams across Virginia. Virginia is home to 24 hydropower facilities generating 439 megawatts of power. At the Ivy Lake Dam facility, the chief engineer is huddled next to their systems team as they helplessly struggle with their network being run by an unknown. And just as the realization hits them, the dam gates begin to open. What the? Water crashes down with such force and speed that the aged infrastructure begins to crumble quickly, drowning out the warning sirens as cascades of rushing water obliterates all in its way. 1,000 residents lie downstream and are at risk in the path of the raging water. At the Yorktown Power Station, the coal generating facility is experiencing abnormalities or problems in their networks. They're not sure. The CTO had never seen activity like this. He racks his brain and can't even remember an exercise in his years in the military that dealt with such unknowns. The night before, he noted some abnormalities, just a couple of things. It didn't make sense. But he briefly thought, could it be a breach? Heck, he didn't want to disturb any of the management at home. After all, it was 11:15 p.m. at night, and there'd be hell to pay if he woke up a VP or worse, the CEO. What would you say? We don't know what it is? I'm not sure, sir. No, I don't have a solution because I don't know what it is. Yeah, that goes over well, he thought. Luckily, within the hour, things seemed to be running like normal. Good things. He didn't act on those hairs on this that stand up, on the back of your neck, the ones we all have at some point. Who knows? Our power grid is a patchwork of systems pieced together with over 70 years of technology, he rationalized further. It was just a small thing. Snapping out of his recollection, the CTO notes it's 10:35 a.m. Just then, a young millennial systems engineer rushes in and yells, "We have a breach, a virus or something. We need to execute contingencies immediately." Now, calm down. How do you know? Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's just take this one step at a, says the CTO. The hairs on the back of his neck, again, are uncomfortable, tight, in standing up. Listen to me. Execute the contingency plans now. The backup systems are down, completely offline, and I can't get anything to respond. Something's moving through our system. His voice is drowned out by the emergency sirens blaring. And then, darkness. In the Situation Room in the White House, the President's National Security Team is assembled. They listen intently as the Secretary of Defense quickly gives the situation report. Russian troop movement into Lithuania and indications of cyber attacks in other Baltic countries. The National Security Advisor reads the flash on the screen just as the aide whispers an update on what is believed to be a cyber attack in the Virginia Tidewater. Other augments critical facts in the SITREP, and the Secretary of Defense asks, attacks? Attack? Or attacks? And does anyone know where the Secretary of Homeland Security is? The Secretary of State clarifies, which attack are we talking about? The troop movements and the cyber activity in the Baltics, or the ones in our country? We don't know yet, sir. All power is out in half of Virginia, and we're worried about the cascading effect on the power grid throughout the East and Southeast. The steady voice of the Secretary of State continues. And we have 400 world leaders, tech CEOs, and business CEOs at the World Economic Forum Small Business Symposium in Williamsburg. They are in the dark, the airports are shut down, traffic is disabled, we have no lights and limited backup power, only has a couple hours runtime. Further, the temperature's dropping, snow's forecast, and we have a report of dam failure in the region. The Secretary of Energy enters the room and joins the group. Eyes turn on him as he opens the file clutched in his hand. Sir, we have a situation in the Surrey nuclear power plant. And the SecDef glances over at the paper handed to him. And, he continues, the plant controls appear to be out of our hands. Someone is running this from outside the United States. It appears to be sourced in the Middle East, but we are unconfirmed in attribution. How can that be? What the heck do you mean? Out of our control? Asked the National Security Advisor. Who's controlling it? Russians? China? Iran? DPRK, North Korea? We think the Chinese, says the Secretary of Energy, and at the same time, we think the Iranians, says the Secretary of Defense. And then the President summarizes. We know what we don't know. What is clear to me is the United States is under attack. Now, tell me what we do know and give me options. So, Tiffany, what do we know?
We know there's a whole lot of chaos happening right now. We have an inkling that there could be a coordinated attack within the U.S.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
There we go. We're good.
All right. So we know there's a whole lot of chaos happening right now. We could surmise that there might be an actual coordinated attack by a possible nation state. We've seen in open source press reporting, countries like Russia like to coordinate cyber efforts in addition with some of their troop movements. But as of right now, we really don't know exactly what's happening. So there's a lot of discussion happening between local, private, government organizations. Some of the challenges between all of those organizations is that they don't always speak all the same lexicon. So they're all trying to make their points and they're all trying to share information, but it might not be in the format that might be expected. It might not be in the vernacular that might be expected.
All those acronyms.
Yeah, all those acronyms.
Okay.
And so that's probably about what's happening right now. All of the flags are going up. Every security operations center in the United States, from the DNI all the way down, is all on high alert. Twitter is going crazy right now. So if you don't have a capability to be able to amalgamate some of that information and make sense of it very, very quickly, you could be drawn to wrong conclusions. So, yeah, very challenging time.
Okay, well, Ken's here. Ken, what do we know?
Well, I think as Tiffany covered, we don't know a whole lot. We have a series of events that are happening at the, roughly in the same time, same region. But we do have an overseas activity that could be linked. Most folks don't believe that much in coincidence, particularly in the national security environment. So it would appear.
Who believes in coincidence? Raise your hand. Okay, good.
Somebody,
Yeah. We'll talk to you later.
and so that at least early on, I would think there would be a presumption that perhaps these are linked. As Tiffany said, attribution is going to be very difficult to sort out, and that drives some of your response options and dialogue with external partners as well to try and generate an international response. But I think at the national level, as Tiffany talked, first there'll be the gathering of who is the appropriate community of interest for this problem.
Okay, so who would that be? I mean, the president needs some information pretty quick,
Yeah.
so who would that be?
So the immediate group, of course, is his national security staff, and then he's going to have the appropriate agencies. I'm sure we're going to have DOE, Department of Energy is involved, Nuclear Regulatory Commission's involved. There's clearly a Homeland Security issue, so DHS will be involved once they find the secretary. Obviously, DOD will be in a supporting role, but not in charge. Department of State, because there is certainly international implications, given the fact that once we have an overseas issue, but we also have these foreign visitors, some of whom are very high ranking at
Yes.
the conference in Norfolk. So
It's an issue, and excuse me for interrupting, but President Putin called the president, he was busy in the Situation Room, about a minute after the attack and said they didn't do it. Just wanted to add that in.
well, there you go.
Okay,
We can line through Russia on this one.
okay,
And then as far as response, obviously, first response is always that local response. And you can presume at least that the city of Norfolk has got a response plan for Surrey and for some of these other events.
okay.
But then there'll also
I
be...
see them over there. They're sitting over there, right over there, that they've got a team going. Okay, good.
And I think the other thing that will be an immediate question early on is, okay, so given what we know now, how bad could this be? What is the potential scope
Okay.
and range of the impact of this? Obviously, nuclear facility, the president's going to want to know how bad is the upper range? Could this thing melt down? What does that mean?
Okay, absolutely. Todd, you have a little problem. You have 400 world leaders. They're talking in multiple language now. Their security staffs have satellite phones and different things. There are different comms going on, and you're in the dark. But the good news is you have beeswax candles. So tell me what's going on. You're in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Well, we know even less than what they know in Washington because we're sitting in the dark. We don't have power. At first, it looks like we just got a power outage, garden variety power outage.
Okay.
And then rumors start to float in as people are on their phones about other things that are going on. So it really is that sense of unease and panic, and whether there's a more significant crisis brewing we've got to get a handle on.
Okay, so you have media all over you. As a matter of fact, somebody just put a microphone underneath you and said, "We understand we're under attack. Are troops going to hit Williamsburg?"
Well, we don't know that, and I don't think we're being talking to the media right now. So.
Okay. All right. Well, boy, I've got a job to do too, sir. So I'm just saying that, if troops attack us, are you ready?
Oh, well, we aren't going to be under attack.
Okay. Well, we'll go to a commercial now on that. So we know what we don't know. Anything else from your leaders?
Well, they're communicating both back home, but also we have business leaders here, right?
Right.
And so they're trying to figure out what are the implications for their companies. They're communicating with their teams back where they are, trying to figure out what's going on. And mostly, again, they don't know what's going on.
You were so lucky to get the head of Uber. That was amazing for this conference. Right. How many cars does Uber own? Okay. And they were providing the transportation, but nobody can use Uber, the power's out.
That's right.
So that's an issue, isn't it? Okay, so what do we know? Anything else? Anybody going to help me here? What do we know? Anything else we need to know here? Help me out. It's Norm? Got any ideas? You want to think about it a minute? Think about it a minute, okay? Help me out here. Okay, where's my Virginia team over here? What are you doing? One of you guys. Anybody? Gals? Okay, I'm going to come find you. This is interactive. Okay, so let's see. What next? So Todd, let's go back to you. You've got a good part of the brain trust and the leadership on parts of the globe.
I think the thing that we need to do right away is begin to share information. Because under any of these situations, you hear all kinds of things, many of which are rumors and unfounded, and at the end of the day are inaccurate, especially if you're relying on Twitter or other news feeds. So we have the resources in the room to compare notes and begin to sort out what really is and is not happening. So I think that's the first thing we try to do.
Okay, so you've organized your incumbent team, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you got some business folks, and I heard you got some pretty good guys from the international leadership community too.
We do, but of course, internationally, we have folks with all kinds of different interests. And we have to begin thinking about, is there anybody here that has some involvement in what's going on?
Yeah, so I heard that no one can find the vice president. Where's he?
I got word that he has left.
Okay.
Which is deepening our concern that this is a real crisis
Okay.
and not just a garden variety power outage.
Ken, what happened to the vice president? What would have happened?
I think he'd have been whisked away by the Secret Service.
Okay. Okay. So Hoosier is not on the scene, if you will. So Tiffany, anything else here?
I would imagine that the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force would probably be going a little, getting a real busy at this point. All the FBI field offices their phones would be ringing off the hook. They would be trying to engage with their sources of private security information in addition to some of the underground information. They would be having to report to the CTIC, which is at the DNI, and everyone at this point would still be trying to make sense of the situation.
Okay. So we have some cascades going on. The realm of the power outages are now, it's all across Virginia, up to Maryland. We're in northern part of North Carolina. What's happening in the grid? Do you guys want any experts here from the audience? Let me see if I can find some help. Anybody? Todd?
Yeah, we need to find out what's happening with the grid and what's causing this situation.
Anybody in the power
Anybody?
business? Well, anybody in the power business first? I got to identify my assets real quick. Come on, come on, come on. Nobody works for Duke Energy? Now's not the time to be shy. Okay, anybody have a nuclear power background?
I think you've got somebody in the back.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Could you help me?
One thing that you don't know is what others don't know. What's your mechanism for advising all the other different nuclear plants in the U.S. that you're dealing with this problem?
Okay, so how do we do that, sir?
Sorry?
How do we do that, sir?
I'm curious what your answer would be. You do it
Okay. All right, who wants to grab that one?
DOE or Department of Homeland Security. How would you notify California that Surrey is under attack and where you are in solving the problem?
Go ahead.
I'm going to guess here, but I think I would say that I would imagine that between DOE and Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they've got pretty good communication networks to transmit at this point. We have a problem at one of our facilities, and whatever information they have at this point. But I think one of the real challenges is that how do you connect those who know something with those who need to know something, and then how do you get that laterally across to all the others that might need to know if this is going to be a broader attack? So I think your point is well taken. Hey, right now we've had one nuclear power plant affected and some other connected electrical facilities. What is next? Is it a plant out on the West Coast? How do we get what little we may know, which is really down in that incident site? How do we connect their fact-finding and that local response with decision makers at both the regional and the national level and get commo flowing up and down laterally at the same time as you've got people asking a million other questions? So all of that has got to be going on right now in parallel to things like potential attribution, indicators and warnings for subsequent attacks, and all the conversations about, and what are the Russians doing overseas? And all of this comes down to, when you look at a federal response, the question always is, who's in charge? Well, the president's in charge. There may be lead
Yeah, and
federal
he wants more
agencies.
information fast. He's getting
He-
impatient.
he,
yeah.
he needs information quickly. And the question is, how do we get it to him?
So Tiffany, so
Your FBI speaker, but I'm guessing it's going to be through the FBI to the state fusion centers to those members of the power grid as the threat information flows through to the domestic threat.
well, so here we got a little problem because all the power's out, limited cell phone coverage, and Tiffany, you've just gotten on the phone with Todd because you understand some of our top telco folks and some of our comms people are doing it in Williamsburg. So what do you need to know? What do you need to know from a communication side to help, you know, with some of the gaps that Ken's talking about and our esteemed colleague here has mentioned? What do you need to know?
I need to know what exactly it was they saw and where ground zero is. I need to know who, what, when, where, why, right, as much as possible. So what was the first facility that was hit? What was the first activity that occurred? What were the mitigation strategies? Are the security folks looking at all the logs? When were the anomalies identified? Who else knows about this? What kind of, has remediation started anywhere? What capabilities are they currently lacking? And just as the gentleman back there said, once you start gathering all that information, what you hope is that those centers of communication will start gathering similar responses so that we can start dissipating some of that chaos. Because as you mentioned, Twitter's going to be, lighting up. There's going to be rumors all over the place. Poor Todd has to deal with his community asking whether or not we're under attack. But once you start getting some of that technical data as quickly as possible and funneling it to analytical centers who can start doing some of that correlation and comparison analysis, then hopefully we're going to start getting to a little bit of ground truth.
Okay, so here's the good news. See this team over here? The president of Montreat College had his team of expert cyber interns. Todd graciously invited them to the conference. So they're all assembled over here. And Todd, am I understanding you right? You tasked them to help solve the problem?
Absolutely. I mean, we need
What
to,
do you need to know?
we
I got
know-
them right here, but they're going to be cold because it's snowing and the temperature is dropping. But can you guys get through that? Can you? I can't hear you. Hey, we have a crisis here. How are you going to help Todd? Come on. How are you going to help him? You're in a room. You got some computer equipment that's got backup power. Somebody's attacking us. Come on.
Not that far.
Huh? Why would I go to interns for this? Why would I go to these young minds for this? Anybody want to answer that? Okay, you guys, work your problem set. Really good that you didn't let me interrupt the vast work you're doing, but I want a solution here in a few minutes, okay?
I'm part of that group as well. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we
So
got
I'm part of that group as well. Hey guys. So what we want to do is we want to, since we got some computer and power, we want to try to pinpoint where the threat is coming from, and then maybe try to go ahead and like work with it and try to like calm the threat down as much as possible, so we can try to get some power back up in West Virginia, and try to get those people in the conference to safety, just in case if there's a physical attack from like terrorists.
Excellent. Okay, so does anyone know anything about mesh networking? Anybody in the room? Work with me here. Okay, General, tell me about mesh networks a little bit. Why would we want to do some ad hoc stuff here right at this moment in time? We have a cascading crisis. We got a team, maybe that's what they're working on over there. Let's see, what do you think?
Well, I think what you're talking about is essentially the capability to bring in a temporary infrastructure to establish a communications grid in the absence of the established cell and hardline networks.
Shouldn't we wait? I mean, maybe just wait a little while. Oops, whoops, whoops,
Yeah,
whoops, whoops, whoops. They're evacuating to a 10-mile radius from the nuclear power plant. Apparently, we have a very, very serious situation going on. So the other thing is, sir, I understand that there's been communication to the military bases to get some of those leaders evac'd out. Any further thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I don't think we'd be evacuating military leadership at this point. I would expect, though, that they'd be put on standby to provide potential responses or to help and support the local community, the local community's response. Of course, all of that has to come with a presidential direction unless it's a life or limb situation. So there are procedures for providing military support to civilian authority.
They can't just jump in.
Actually, there is a limited capability to just jump in if they're out of comms and if the local commander assesses that life, limb, or
Okay.
serious issues are at stake. So,
So
there is some latitude at the local level.
The National Guard is executing rescue operations due to the dam failures. But they're under the control at this point of
The state government probably.
the state government. Okay. And let's see, the temperature's dropping, the snow's moving in, we're down quite a bit, and there's no heat, no power. Todd, how are you doing there in Williamsburg?
Well, we're a little stressed here. We have world leaders who are working with their teams, and they have security. I have security teams with us too, and they're all trying to figure out if they're safer trying to get to an airport, trying to get out of the country, or whether they're safer trying to essentially shelter in place. And we're trying to provide them with enough information
Okay,
to make that decision.
excellent. Tiffany, you've got a team out here of extraordinary experts. What do you need from them? What's going on? What do you need at this stage now? This is clearly a significant situation, and we have more Russian troop movements in the other Baltic countries.
So to the general's point, we need to start discerning who's in charge, right? Who's lead for communications, who's going to take the lead for information sharing. Go ahead.
Just curious if any of your group has contacted Cyber Command, or is the President under National Command Authority directed NSA to begin working this problem as well?
Oh,
They
definitively.
began it in the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah,
They would have already been on
They'd
spot.
probably been tracking it all along. But that's a very good point. So, whole of government effort, right? Is that the point that you're trying to make there? Because it's a very important one. And if there's anything that you can take from the discussion today, we're hoping that a scenario like this will help you see that it really is from senior leadership all the way down to local. It's a group sport. It's a team sport. So, yeah.
Anybody?
I think the Department of Homeland Security, in essence, is going to be the lead federal agency for the consequence management of these kind of attacks. But everybody else, as Tiffany said, will be providing support. So from a DoD perspective, from an agency, national security agency perspective, everybody in the intelligence community is going to swivel to this problem to try and start answering those questions. Who's in charge? What's happening? How did they do it? To do all those subsequent second and third order actions that have to take place of, okay, how do we stop it from happening again? How do we mitigate the issues that we currently have? And at the same time, you're trying to figure out how do we support local responders who are dealing with the very quote, tactical issues, the on-the-ground issues of people with no power, people whose homes are being flooded that have to be evacuated, all those things that we watch on TV fairly routinely when a hurricane happens. This is just going to be that magnified because you've got, one, the nuclear aspect, but also multiple challenges across the region.
Okay, so we have Kayla here, and Kayla's working with the team. Kayla, give us an update.
I just thought of a plan of action.
Go ahead, plan of action. She's on it. Go for it. Take the mic. Oh, and by the way, here's some water. We don't have water. All the dams failed, and so I don't want you to not be hydrated.
Okay, we're just freshmen. But something I thought of, if we could go on Twitter and see what's being said, because I think you said something about.
Yeah, you
he's trying
trust
to be
everything on Twitter, right?
He's trying to be invasive.
Yeah, good idea,
right?
though.
And so he's drinking Monster Energy drinks.
Yeah.
He's younger, so he's probably trying to seem normal. So he's probably on Twitter, and he's probably.
So you want to get
talking
the
about
insider. You want to get the jihadist. Good job. Okay. Excellent. Good idea. Plan of action. Anybody else? Ideas? I want ideas here. Come on. Okay. You said I'm only a freshman. I'm just curious, panel. How many young people are absolutely extraordinary in the different areas that you work? Does age matter?
No. Not at all. Age doesn't matter. So, folks who are retiring and going into their second career, everyone can pick this type of capability up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in some of our agencies and some of our military, we only hire people at a certain age? Don't we need the best young talent?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, sooner the better?
Absolutely.
Okay, anyone want to see me for a job later? I'll point you in some really good directions. Okay, so we still now have this team of business leaders. We have titans of technologies. We've got the financial sector. We've got a bunch of grumpy world leaders. And, oh gosh, look what happened. The stock market is falling, 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 and there is a report that banks and financial institutions are having disruptions, both non-kinetically and people trying to access money. But what doesn't work with no power? Paul? Electronic transfers. Okay, I need somebody in the banking sector, financial sector. Where's my broker when I need him? I bought all that Amazon, Uber stock, and Airbnb. Are they working? Okay, what's the cost to your business right now? You're in Virginia. Huh? Anybody? Are you in business? I can't hear you.
Right here.
From a financial perspective, most banks, a lot of banks actually have data centers in the Virginia region.
Yes, sir.
However, what I would be doing with my data centers, I'd be failing over to my Western data centers.
What does that mean? So you're now going to
So
toggle over?
Yeah, so we're in the process of transferring all of our traffic that would have been going through our Virginia data center to our Texas data centers
Do you practice that?
all the time.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea because that's what avoids panic, and that's what avoids freezing in a situation like this, is having a plan and having practiced the plan repeatedly. That's what gives people that confidence to move ahead. So that's exactly what we would hope folks be doing. My problem sitting here in Williamsburg is we're trying to communicate. We're trying to set up a communications network so that we have all these company leaders who are trying to communicate with their teams to make those kind of decisions, and they're having a hard time doing it. In addition to finding out what's happening in the world and seeing how we can help with the international situation.
Okay, so Isaac's volunteered to help too. So he's running there in Williamsburg between some different folks because of we're not all on the same communication platform. Todd, what do you think? Isaac, are you having any problems?
Yeah, I probably have a lot of problems.
So what would you do? How would you solve that? Aren't adults supposed to all know how to do this and practice this and everything? Didn't they?
Probably, but I guess, certain circumstances they can't.
Huh.
There's not a communication.
Okay, so let's see. Where's the soccer team right now?
Probably not playing soccer.
Okay, all right. So anybody else in the financial sector? Everything's pretty much shutting down. The president just closed the market. What does that indicate? There's a big decision. There was a fight in the Situation Room. Why? Why is that significant? Was it a good move? Anybody?
It was probably a good move, but
Matthew?
it's probably a good move, but I think that would quickly get the public perception out to the world that something is definitely going down.
Okay. Are you worried?
No, not at all.
You're not?
Yeah, I got enough food and water. I'm good.
How much food do you have? Do you know the average American has 3 days of food?
Yeah, that's what FEMA requires, right? Or that's
I don't know. I've got a little bit more. How much do you have?
I could probably get by a couple weeks.
A couple weeks. Okay, what's your name?
Jason.
Okay, everybody, go to Jason's house. He has a couple weeks, so you all of a sudden have friends, right? And it's really cold. Okay, so actionable information. We need to act on information. It's now coming in, it's flowing. Tiffany, I need a sit rep on what can we do. We're kind of gathering, but now it's clear we need to act. We have a potential meltdown in a nuclear power facility. There's pretty much some good data now suggesting it could be an Iranian attack. We have increased activity overseas by Russians in the Baltics, and we have a lot of people yelling and screaming from different sectors, and then we have our Homeland team is doing a good job, FBI, others in the center. Give me some possible actions at this stage.
So it's really going to depend on what our national policy is against what's going on in the Middle East, and I'd probably lean more toward the general here to round that out. But what I would imagine is happening is that the Secretary of State's probably going to have one opinion, the Chairman's going to have another opinion, President's going to have another. So,
anybody with the Secretary of State? Can you help me here? Anybody with the Secretary of State? I saw one of you that I know helps him. Anybody? Where are my mic guys? Okay. What do you think? You're with the Secretary of State. What do you think's going on?
Well, I'll help him out.
Okay. Good news. The General's going to help you out.
Yeah, I think this highlights one of the challenges that we're still working through from a policy perspective in the cyber domain. There's a very clear framework in the physical world of actions, right? We have things that range from espionage to psychological operations, sabotage, subversion, all the way up to acts of war. And when those happen, there are established ways to deal with them, right? You catch spies inside your country. They're usually treated in a criminal process. Somebody attacks you with a tank division across your border, you fight back. And there's ranges in between. What we haven't really figured out yet in the cyber world, and all of those kind of things are happening in the cyber world, is what is the appropriate response and counteraction, if you will, when somebody does these things to you. So even if you get to the point where you can have some level of confidence in attribution, in this scenario, we've now been told, okay, it was the Iranians who did it, we think, by means of some kind of computer code inside this power plant. Then the question is, what is the appropriate response? Is that an act of espionage? Is it sabotage, subversion? Does that rise to the level of an act of war? And all of these are questions that are being debated and have been debated now for quite some time. And you've all watched that play out in the media. The allegations of Russian campaigns against our elections inside our media, those are essentially a subversion campaign. The question is, what's the appropriate reaction when a potential adversary does that inside your nation? Do you ignore it? Do you act on it? Just recently we had Bloomberg went out and published an article that said that the Chinese the Chinese government or intelligence agencies have essentially embedded something in chips that are inside various either consumer products or perhaps military government products here in the United States. Now, a lot of debate whether or not that's true or not, but that was out a couple weeks ago. So now the question is, so what did they embed on the chips? If somebody plants a bomb in your house, how do you consider that? Is that an act of, it's not an intelligence act.
It's really bad.
It's really bad from a personal level. And so those are the kind of questions we need to examine in the cyber domain. If somebody, a nation state, an organization, terrorist organization, implants code inside a nuclear power plant that's laying dormant, what threshold have they crossed?
Good.
An unanswered question. So even if right now, the day before the plant went down, If there was code embedded in there that we could attribute to another nation, the question is, what do we do about it? They've planted a bomb. Is that an act of war?
And then to complicate matters even further, everyone in this room understands the nature of cyber and building code and even mail code. You can misattribute. You could run from an intelligence perspective, red herring operations, make it look like it's the Russians when it's really the Chinese. So from a policy appropriate response perspective, it really does cause a challenge. And then you complicate that with personalities or politics, I guess you could say, based on the administration, right? So when President Obama was our sitting president, there was one philosophy for dealing with our cybersecurity issues, and now we have a new administration, and they have a different philosophy with what potential response actions could potentially be, and so.
And the people executing, they're not political. I mean, it's
absolutely
just,
not.
So, okay.
No.
All right. So, Tiffany, I think you better hurry up because the president is really impatient now because he wants action, and they're looters. So here's a zip tie. So we're going to need to do some. Yes.
I haven't heard anybody say anything about a DRP at all. Has anybody said anything about a DRP?
DRP?
Keep going.
Disaster recovery plan. I mean, all of these plans are very, very complex documents that any cybersecurity administrator is going to have in place. I mean, we're going to have roles, we're going to have responsibilities of all of the teams. All of these are going to be filed and figured out before an emergency actually strikes. So
what's your name?
Pepsi Boye. I'm an IT coordinator at King University.
Excellent. Okay.
So I mean, I hear that we're trying to come up with ideas, but DRPs are essential in this sort of planning.
Absolutely. Okay, and you've already executed yours?
I have students develop these constantly.
Excellent. So they're in line. Okay, so perfect. And you're with Todd with his group because you were invited because you're good at that. So how many of you have those? Raise your hand. Okay. Now, how many of you have practiced that plan? Okay. Excellent. What about my local team over here? Have you practiced? Do you not get homework here? Have you practiced? Okay. All right. So we're executing plans.
No, I just
jump on it.
It's a great point. I don't know if you heard me early on. One of the things I said was, particularly at the local level, they'd be executing their plan. The two challenges, though, and it's a great point. At every one of these facilities, there'll be a plan. Norfolk will have a plan to deal with it. There are regional and federal plans. I think the point Joanie was trying to make. Part of the problem with plans is often they are written, they are put on the shelf, and that's the last thing anybody worries about them until disaster strikes. And then everybody's trying to, read the plan and figure out what's supposed to. But if all things have been done well, and a plan was written, it was exercised, it was rehearsed, you're in a pretty good place. But I can guarantee you that the plan that you wrote isn't exactly like the disaster you have, and so you're still going to be modifying on the fly, but at least you're not modifying from a whiteboard. You're modifying from an existing process where people have thought through consequences, they've thought through actions, they've at least done that other step I talked about, which is, hey, what's the community of interest? Who should be involved in providing information and conducting analysis? Because it's not just those in government, right? We do want the business leaders involved. If you rely just on the government problem-solving mechanism, you're going to miss second and third order consequences. For example, we talked about financial sector, and we asked for the energy expert. Where's Jim Kelly? I told you I was going to call on you. So, works with Mission Health. So talk about what's the impact you think right now on the health system in the affected area.
So I love the comment about the disaster recovery plans, because we in a hospital have to have numerous plans, and one of our plans is we call it the OS plan, but I won't get into why, but It's the plan that we execute when we have to go off of technology. So it's really that downtime plan that we say, how do we maintain patient care when technology has been shut down? And so, again, I think, one of the things that you have to do in each line of business is remember your core tenets. What are you there to do? And in healthcare, ours is to take care of the patient. And so we can't let these, I'll call them distractions, affect our daily operation of running a hospital. So we keep our patients alive first, and that involves a lot of business decisions. So we'll execute our emergency action plan with the hospital leadership. One of the first things that we do is cancel all elective surgeries. Well, that's akin to us of shutting down the stock market.
Excuse me, how do you communicate with those people?
So we have a war room, and fortunately we're all in one location. So even if comms are down, we know that everyone assembles at the main hospital, and we have regional folks that come in.
I really need to get my eyes done though, and I don't have a lot of time. I had that scheduled, and I mean, I'm on the board at your hospital.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that happens. That's
This
a real world
okay,
scenario.
well, this could be over in an hour, so I don't want to just have to go somewhere else.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you for your generous donation to our foundation.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, okay.
But it is important to think about the sector that you work in and how you execute. We have a cyber team. They would be working diligently to find out what effect this is going to have on our future. So they're looking at what's the potential that we would lose power, and how do we start to put in our plans to go to either a secondary data center, or running a different hospital, or triaging patients in different ways.
Okay. So I've been assigned a cyber guy, so key leaders assigned somebody that can communicate off of non-traditional means. And Todd, I understand you've got some things going on.
Well, Tiffany, I think we may have a solution to some of our communications issues. This team over here, maybe helping us set up a network.
Okay, team.
Guys?
Comms?
I actually had a question.
Okay, but then a solution, please. I don't have time.
I'll try my best. I don't know our current policies on cyber attacks at home versus attacks overseas, but are we in communication with our allies overseas, like in Europe and other parts of North America? And then also, on the reverse, instead of government, many companies have locations outside the U.S. Are they also in communications with their cohorts in the U.S. and with the U.S. government?
Okay.
Does that happen?
Okay, good question, and then work on your solution while it gets answered. Companies, other locations, our allies, I think. Well, what's going on, guys?
Yeah. So the good news is
Very good.
those are all well-established relationships, certainly within the intelligence community. And so you can rest assured that as soon as something like this happens, there is a network of intelligence analysts that are talking to their counterparts really around the world. And it's a two-way communication, right? We're telling them what we just saw, what we think we know, and we're looking for help from them, because we may not be the only nuclear power plant that's affected, and it may not be the West Coast, it may be over in Europe somewhere. And so there's going to be a pretty good transmission of what we know as soon as we know it through intel channels. I'll defer on the business side how that would work.
One of the points I wanted to make is you step back and think about why an attack like this would be launched. Most of the most dire consequences of an attack like this are the sort of secondary and tertiary responses that we have to it. It's sort of the panic that sets in, the financial consequences, all the rest of that. So that's going to be the first thing.
These guys are acting on it right now.
That's going to be the first thing on business leaders' mind is how do we contain this? How do we keep those results from happening? How do we essentially thwart their plan? And that's because not all the businesses around the country have access to the information that the intelligence folks have.
That's the question that I had. The question I had was, who decides the priority? Who decides the priority as far as like we can have all the DRPs we want, but whose DRP is takes precedent over another DRP, obviously. How do you get all of those disaster recovery plans to work in congruence, across organizationally, like you mentioned, the joint task force. There's a lot of moving parts. There's multi-layered pieces to this, and how, who determines the priority there? And I know you said DHS, and I know FEMA has the ICS infrastructure there, and there's tons of different scenarios and practice plans that you can go through. And, I guess who's the deciding factor other than the administration?
Well, right, and we just had to take your company and evacuate it due to the nuclear power plant potentially melting down. So they're all dispersed. Can you communicate with your team?
If I'm elevated on a certain mesh network that's not tethered to the conventional network right now.
Excellent. Okay, good. And you have some few folks who are at the hospital for possible radiation poisoning. And then I hear, Todd, you have a young team that might have an answer. Did I hear that right?
Hello. Okay, so I have a solution, but there's also a bit of a question in it. So like, let's say that, we do use social media and we end up finding the individual who started the code in the nuclear plant. We get him, we have access to all his technology. How would we be able to use that to fix this problem?
Okay, so we have really two questions here that are important in our status. Y'all?
Can you summarize them for us? I didn't quite get it.
Okay. Give me a quick summary.
Okay, so we caught him.
It's going to the president, so quick.
Okay, we have his technology. What do you want us to do with it?
So you have technology. You can enable some network. How do you communicate, and that you have some help? Is that fair?
Yeah, like we have what he has.
You have a possible
his
solution? Summarize your question.
My question was the priority. What takes priority? Are we mitigating this now and getting the power back up? Is that the priority? Or are we going to use this information that they've come up with to reverse or find a solution for the attack in the first place? What takes priority?
I think the answer is yes. We've got to do all those things simultaneously. And it's not a question of figuring out which is which. All the business leaders that are with me in Williamsburg are trying to communicate with their teams to decide which plans to execute, how quickly to do that, and how to keep their businesses operational. At the same time that they want to contribute to an overall solution if they have the technical expertise and ability to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say on the, kind of whose plan takes precedence. I'm not a, inside the United States Homeland Security expert, but I have had some touch with it, and I would just say that there's a pretty good hierarchy based on the incident on who owns incident management lead, if you will. In this case, I think we're going to see, Department of Homeland Security as the overall. The federal government owns responsibilities on nuclear power plants, from what I understand. Now, once again, local areas are going to have their own plan on how they implement that, but they're going to be taking their lead from the federal government on this. And then the other thing I'd say on this is on actions to take place. I would say that, retribution or going after the perpetrators, while we'll be trying to figure out who did it, and there may be some, if we identify that we think a nation state is involved, we may start that diplomatic demarching, et cetera. But for the most part, I would say at this point, think back to 9/11. The focus is on the initial consequence management. How do we mitigate the right now a threat to life, property, et cetera? And then all those other things are going to kind of come secondarily in time.
General, I understand the president has initiated some issues or some actions with special operation forces, but that's just overseas.
We've got this in the scenario. You've got this thing happening with the Russians, and of course, although on one hand we have attribution now that potentially this is the Iranians, we still have to ask the question of, was it mere coincidence that the Russians have apparently moved into the Baltics at the same time as this Iranian-sponsored attack has happened in the United States? And you look at the location of it. So Norfolk, as was read in the scenario, is a pretty significant military base. It's very important to our Navy. It is really the Atlantic Fleet is based there. And so if you look at our naval capability to control the sea lanes to the Baltics, as well as to provide transport and reaction, it comes out of Norfolk primarily. And so the question is this linked to the Russian activity, and was this a means to, Iranians seeking their objectives, attack the US, but it also feeds into somebody else's strategic plan. All those things have to be answered quickly, but still the number one concern I can tell you, I would think of our national leadership will be, holy cow, what's the threat to US citizens from either the nuke plant or the dam breaking, et cetera. That's really the immediate problem. Although we do have to unwind what happened at this nuke plant very quickly so we can, quote, regain control and prevent this attack from happening elsewhere.
Okay. Tiffany, the president wants you to advise him, please.
Can I ask a question first?
Yeah, but he's really getting grumpy, so.
I need to ask this question. So especially since we have so many business people here, as far as threat intelligence goes, and informing your disaster plans and your contingency plans, can someone give me some examples of the most reliable and trusted threat intelligence that your organizations receive to inform your preparedness?
We should see a lot of hands up here.
FBI? Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Sir?
So we utilize multiple vendors on different segments of our network. So obviously we utilize some of the higher security companies to provide us with their intelligence, as well as obviously connect our own. And obviously the FBI, but a lot of the time when the FBI release something, it's quite dated because they've got to confirm their facts. Because obviously you're saying the Iranians, you're saying the Russians. At this point, you don't know who. And obviously, General, I appreciate the fact that you said the main concern for you is the US risk to life. So obviously your main priority at the moment is to protect what's happening there. And even if you do have, obviously you're saying who prioritizes who. We're talking to 3 people here, which the whole US government is thousands of people who can prioritize and work multiple missions at one time. Risk to life is obviously primary. So in Virginia, it may be that you have to get the National Guard to evacuate them, and then they can establish military communications through line of sight satellite to establish that. And then obviously, as the student said, if it's happening in the Baltics, I'm British, I'm ex-military, so I know the British are on that, the Germans are on it, the French, so there are other allies you can rely to assist on the movements of that. But obviously the primary point now is the recovery, the identification of the threat, and then obviously sharing that out to protect the US and allies, so then you can obviously prevent any further damage. And the retaliation, it's not physical, it's obviously the retaliation is to prevent it ever happening again. And if they do attempt it, obviously, that's the reason why we're different to them in the Middle East, is we will not retaliate physically, we just obviously adapt and overcome and become better as a whole. But yeah.
2 nuclear power plants in Iran just went offline, coincidentally, so, okay.
So that would suggest that not necessarily for them, and then if it has gone offline, does that mean that it's more global?
Okay, so team, the president, Tiffany, let's start with you and maybe summarize for him.
So we have a national security incident likely. The intelligence that's coming in leads us to believe that it's the Iranians. At this point, sir, we're looking at several options. Some options to consider would be over State Department to their leadership discussions. I would imagine there would be some NSA activity that's occurring overseas to see if we can get some SIGINT and some ground truth. I would imagine the other intelligence organizations, from military to the traditional agency folks, would be pulsing all of their networks. We'd tell the president that we need to resource them a little bit more to ensure that they have the capabilities they need to keep running operations for collection.
Okay, so Todd, we know that these nefarious actors have been operating in our country. That is a fact, right? We know that.
Obviously.
You're getting some really good solution sets, actions from your business team. You've got a couple world leaders that have scrubbed their teams in communicating. What else? Help me summarize this from your perspective.
Well, we need some leadership from the president, actually, that we're on top of the situation. What the business community is already being looked for is some sense of leadership and assuredness that we know what's happened here and that we have the ability to deal with it.
So leadership is
absolutely
critical. Okay, but leadership in that business community too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really
But just the big businesses.
Oh no, that's exactly the point I was about to make. Was smaller companies all around the country are the ones that are likely to be the hardest hit by this. Because they will be significantly shut down. They're going to be affected by the larger companies they do business with. And those are companies that are less likely to have a plan for something like this. Companies increasingly are focused on the cybersecurity threats to their company and their networks. And I think are less, especially in the small sector, less and less focused on an overall crisis nationally or regionally that could be created by an attack like this. Since 9/11, I think that part of the business community has let its guard down on crisis planning and communication significantly, and we've got to fix that.
Okay, and some of those critical infrastructures are pretty old too, and that's something that came up in your discussions.
Absolutely.
So it's hard to patch up old stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's a big problem in our sector.
Yeah, okay. Ken, the president's waiting to hear from you.
Well, I think we can tell them at this point that we've got communication fairly well established from the local through the regional level. We're getting a good sense of what the requirements will be that exceed local capacity to manage the humanitarian crisis and respond to it. And we will start mobilizing through FEMA and beyond across the government if, in fact, more resources are needed to respond to either the flooding or the evacuation and support of those who were evacuated.
Okay. So anybody here in business have anything to share with the president? Any suggestions, sir?
So let's talk about that. Have we communicated with the news organizations so that organizations perhaps that are in the business world that aren't tapped into the government communication can go, okay, let's air gap these critical systems, or this is what's spreading, how do we take care of it, how do we communicate through the news organizations from the government organizations that, since not everybody's going to jump on this same conference call, not everybody's going to be part of this messaging platform, how do you communicate a consistent message out so that people can start taking care of this both at a citizen level and a business organization level and even a utility level, and again, start air gapping if necessary, start implementing their own disaster recovery plans before the disaster even happens, knowing that this could spread to them.
So the media potentially could serve a helpful role in this. Is that also part of what you're saying? Okay, so how many of you have a relationship with the media? Know somebody that you could pick up the phone and call? Raise your hands. Okay, is that it? Okay, all right, sir. It's a one-way communication? Okay.
Twitter, Facebook, and other ways that the population is used to communicating with now, they're unable to do that in large parts of the country.
Excellent.
So it seems like there needs to be a strategy for calming people down and also getting messages out that don't rely on what everyone's used to.
Okay. So what I want to do here is take a little pause button for a second. Does anyone else, any of my team here, have any other immediate, quick solutions, no more than 3 or 4 words? Anybody? Okay. So, team, We have actions that we know by adversaries currently going on in the United States. Is that a fair statement? Okay. Are we prepared? We have a cascading consequence both overseas, in the United States. It's now spreading in the Southeast. Are we able to handle that? And in the answer of those questions, what are 3 or 4 things, or what comes to mind, what can people do if this happened tomorrow in anticipation? Okay? Who would like to start?
I can start. So I think it's going to be vitally important that you develop those relationships with FBI, for example. If that's one of your trusted avenues of threat intelligence, they might be able to provide you with indications and warning. I would make sure that you engage with at the local level. If you have your local media outlets, make sure that you already make them part of your comp plan if you feel that that's going to be vitally important. Those are two big ones.
I would say if you haven't practiced your emergency response plan, do it this afternoon, and do it on a regular basis. That's, I think, exactly the kind of thing that provides clear thinking in a crisis like that, which really is the crucial piece for recovery and an ongoing stability in the country.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah, I guess just to reiterate, we have adversaries, both state actors and non-state actors and individuals that are, as many of you know, very actively engaged in daily targeting in the cyber domain. Everything from messages of subversion and trying to make chaos happen to preparations for significant attacks that will have physical effects on our society. And it's important to understand, I think, as we've learned, particularly in this world, given the nature of how our networks have been developed over time, that defense is important, and all those measures you take are critical, but you're always one insider away or one bad attack surface away from a disaster. And so defense is important, but it will never be sufficient. You really do need to spend time on those emergency plans, the contingency plans. And I think one we talked about, it's got to actually be rehearsed. One of the other challenges with these emergency plans is that usually the people who are going to be the decision makers in a crisis have not participated, even if you've done everything. I wrote a plan, I exercised a plan, we've worked all our different contingencies. The men and women who weren't in those exercises and who didn't read the plan are usually the key decision makers, the key senior leaders. So the question is, how do we, in crisis, communicate everything that the collective knew, that community of interest, the experts, if you will, and how do you bring it to the president or a governor or the CEO to say, okay, here's all the work we've done, take a deep breath, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here are some recommended actions, and you're the man or woman who's got to make the decision now. But they're going to be making it without the benefit of all the experience that others may have had, even if they did their own work. And then the last thing I'd say is kind of a point, just to emphasize a point Todd made, is I think right now people are very good about making contingency plans within their stovepipe, right? So I'm in the health business. I'm looking at what happens with the hospital. Do your plans consider what happens to other industries and how that industry may affect you? Obviously, when the power goes off, it affects everybody. But there are other industry connections there and business connections that I think we ought to examine in our contingency plans.
Okay, well, so here's the good news. A young person who was at your conference discovered the source and was able to stop the cascade of the virus in the nuclear power plant. Yeah, yep, they've done a very good job that way. So we have at least contained. We still have some, significant crisis going on, but they have been successful there. But the key here is information, communication, and as I'm about to talk to the president here, we've established that we've got to also have actions. And So I guess to summarize, and I'll just tell the President, Mr. President, what we've had is a good situation thus far, sir, with some very good leaders. We've had an extraordinary team of leaders up here. What do you think about them, guys? I've been impressed. Locally, we've got some great leaders that really scrubbed in and helped. We've got a team of young folks that have helped. We've said we've contained the situation. We do have an overseas situation, and we still have activity in the United States, but I'm confident. Interesting, too, is our leader here in the hospital is inviting over all of the cybersecurity program teammates here, regardless of age. And we should note it was a 19-year-old that found that virus. The other thing we'd say, the financial sector's reach out, and especially in the media, has helped calm things down. And we certainly have established for after action that we need to talk a little bit more about contingency. Sir, is there any questions you have?
You've done a great job. Thank you.
Well, we're still at it. So the key to any good job is the team you're with. So look to your right. Look to your right. If you don't know the person next to you, stick your hand out and introduce yourself. In a crisis, that's the first thing you do. Turn around. Turn around. Okay. And turn to your left. And then always lean forward. In a crisis, leadership's what counts. It's your character and your qualities and how you exercise what you've done, what you know, and what you can do. Okay? And so for that, I'd like to say thank you. I realize this was a little different presentation for you all, and we deeply, deeply, on behalf of Ken and Tiffany and Todd, we very much appreciate the leadership you already have exhibited out in your communities and in your education and different aspects. And also thank you for helping us today. So thank you very much.
Please join me in thanking Joanie.